Hi, it's Chris here from the EQMod project. In this video we're going to look at EQASCOM's horizon limits. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is open up the limits editor. In fact, the first thing I'm going to do is disable current limits because I don't want those going off. And then open up the limits editor. I'll just make things a little clearer to see. The limits editor for the horizon limits is fairly simple. What you do is you define yourself a horizon profile, something that looks a bit like a kind of a cityscape skyline. And the way you do that is you add points to a list. Now there are 2 or 3 ways of doing that. You can either move your mount to a position on the horizon and add a point, or you can manually enter the point, or you can okay, the display that we're looking at the moment, it shows us that we're at defaults and the default horizon profile is simply 0 degrees in altitude. If the mount were to point below that level, it would stop tracking immediately. The little cross you see here is actually showing us where the mount is currently pointing. We've got a slider here that lets us zoom out so we can see different values of elevation or altitude, and the x-axis is our 0 to 360 degrees of azimuth. Okay, let's add the planetarium open, and as you can see, my scope. To do that, what we have to do is click this little green add button here, and you'll see the horizon line has immediately shifted up, so it's no longer at 0, it's now hanging around at about 8 degrees. Because we've only got one point, it's a constant 8 degrees. Right, I'm now going to add a few extra points. So what I'm going to do is basically navigate our way around these trees. Adding points as we go. And you can see the profile changes for each point that's added. I'll do one more point. Somewhere down here somewhere. So here, I just wanted to add a few points to show you how the thing works. Now there's 2 ways in which EQASCOM can take these points and join them together. At the moment it's in an interpolated mode. So between each point that I've added, it's interpolated a line, a straight line in between each point. The alternative way of doing it is to use the greatest altitude, in which case it looks at 2 points and it finds the one that has the greatest altitude, and that will be the altitude at a given point. So you can see that by changing it you get a much more squarer look to the profile. If you're designing your profile to actually avoid tracking into physical obstructions, then greatest altitude is probably the strategy you want to use. If you're simply doing it for visual obstructions, where there's no real harm if the scope were to cross a leaf of a tree visually, then you can use the interpolated approach. Okay, so I've created my profile here I now need to save it, and to do that we click this button here, and then we just give it a name. I've already got one defined here called My Horizon. I'm going to overwrite that, but I could type in any file name I liked. As long as it's got a .text extension, you can place it anywhere on your hard disk. Okay, once it's saved, we can do other actions. I could put the thing back to defaults if I wanted, and then reload it just to show it works. If you need to delete any points, you simply use this button here. That deletes a point. I'll reload it again. If you want to add points manually, then you can just specify an azimuth position, say 300 degrees, an altitude. Let's put a point right up at say 30. Click this button here. It will add it to the list. The profile will change. The thing to do is to look at this profile and make sure it's looking as you want it to look. Once you're happy with it, you save it. Now EQASCOM will automatically load your saved profile on startup, so you don't have to manually load it. Once it's defined, it's there and it will be used. Right, let's try and show the horizon limits in action. To do that, I first need to enable them. I'm just going to move my mount away from the limit before I enable it. I'm just going to rearrange this display slightly so okay, that should do. Right, I'm just moving the scope well away from the limits. So we're above the horizon at the moment. If I set the mount tracking, it'll track quite happily. Now if I slew the mount towards these limits, you'll see that as soon as I cross the line, the horizon limit will kick in. It's displayed on the main EQASCOM display. Tracking is stopped. You can't start it again.
Stop.
If I back away from the limit, the display will return to normal, and you can start tracking. And of course this works for any point along this limit line that we've defined.
Stop.
Here we are. As with meridian limits, you can check this park on limit option, in which case as soon as you hit the horizon limit, the mount will park itself. Could be useful if you're leaving the mount imaging overnight, or you've just left the scope for a while. If the object you're tracking happens to go behind an obstruction, the mount can automatically park itself, so when you return it'll be in a nice safe position. The other thing to note is we have a little display down here which is the time to the horizon. And this is the time that it will take if you're tracking at sidereal rate, and it's telling me at the moment from the position that I'm at that if the RA axis is moving at sidereal rate, then I've got 53 minutes before I will hit the horizon. Again, could be useful if you're imaging. It lets you know how much time you've got before your mount is obstructed, before your view is obstructed. and so you can calculate how many subs you can take. Right, I think that pretty much sums up everything there is to know about horizon limits. So that concludes this demonstration.